Last week, I had lunch with Michael Ting, and I am telling you, this is like one of the smartest dudes in e-commerce I've ever come across. He's got a serious data and quantitative analysis background, and he brings that to Jaxxon, a large and growing men's jewelry and accessories business. And I'm just telling you, this conversation blew my mind in multiple ways. When I got introduced to Michael, it was with basically the same kind of introduction that I'm giving you right now, which is like, dude, you have to talk to this guy. He's extremely smart, and you've never met him before. Turns out he lives in my hometown as well, or where I live now anyway. And so we were able to get lunch, and it was a great conversation. We're bringing that conversation here onto the podcast for you now. I'm just telling you, you're going to hear things I have never heard anybody else say about how their marketing mix is optimized at Jaxxon, and how Michael thinks about that as the head of revenue at Jaxxon. I'm not going to delay it anymore. Let's get into it with Michael Ting, head of revenue at Jaxxon. Michael, thanks for taking it. Dude, you already spent time with me at lunch. I actually got in the car and realized that we'd spent longer than I expected. So thanks for hanging out with me at lunch. Thanks for hanging out with me again on the podcast.
Yeah, definitely. It's pretty crazy that we were 1-2 miles away almost.
I know. So yeah, our mutual friend at INTELLIGEMS, Alex McEachern, he introduced us, and he was like, dude, you got to talk to this guy. And then it's like, I pulled up your LinkedIn, and it's like Torrance. And I was like, Torrance? It's like not a lot of us here. I mean, there's a few e-commerce people here. But yeah, it was fun to do. Hey, I want to get into your background or credentials in a little bit, but I actually want to get straight to the juiciest thing, because I think people are going to be interested in it. You said something to me I've literally never heard anybody say before, that I've always kind of wondered about in the back of my head, but not enough. And I'm probably just not a good enough data person to go do the math here. But you told me that you guys, your core metric, and I'll say it the way I think you said it, and then you can correct me if you need to. But your core metric that you guys have sort of optimized for at Jaxxon and your marketing mix is cost per lead, where lead is an email address added to your CRM. Is that right?
Yeah, it's actually super interesting. I have a good friend at Grüns who was there very early on and is now their president. And it was kind of inspired when I saw these supplement companies and hearing how they manage their advertising spend on like an LTV over CAC. The problem is we're not an LTV, we're not a subscription business. So it was like, at what point can I view, how can I pull forward when I attribute spend to a revenue? And what we found is that the advantage of a lead, an email, is that you can perfectly attribute the sale to the email, and you can attribute the spend to when you got the email. And the combination of those two things just have made it a really powerful metric for us. And it's just about finding these key moments where marketing costs are low, buying intent is high. You're not seeing the sales yet, but you're seeing the interest. And that's really what it's enabled us to do.
So, okay, so there's a lot there. So I want to get into the details of this. So it's a really clever idea. So let's just restate the concept first. Okay, so what you are doing, you are measuring the outcome of your marketing spend on how much money it costs you to get a lead. You have some target, and I'm just going to completely literally make up a number right now. Okay, we'll call it $20 per lead. I literally have no idea if that's true. So before somebody quotes me and says this is what Jaxxon pays for lead, and you should pay it too. Okay, I just want to be very clear. I pulled that number out of thin air. So let's just call it $20 per lead. Okay. Or $10, maybe we'll say $10. I'll make the math easier. $10 per lead, okay? So you look at some target like that, and then you decide whether or not your spend is effective based on how close you are to that cost per lead.
Yeah, definitely. It's pretty much spot on. So we pretty much track the value of each lead, and we do a lifetime value curve where I know that maybe in the first 30 days, a lead is worth, in this example, let's say $15, and then in 1 year, it's worth $30, $40. So I understand the value of each lead. And because of that, I can set a target for how much I'm willing to spend for each lead. So it just lets you, the problem for our business using like a CAC is that it takes really long to decide to buy our product. We're a high AOV business. We're heavily seasonal. You're either in the market or you're not in the market. So it's pretty difficult for us to attribute spend to when it has impact. And we've just been stuck on this problem of like, how can I better attribute spend to when it actually has impact? The number one way we found is that it balances, you sign up pretty quickly after you hear about our brand, especially if you're interested. And combined with that, we can track the impact in terms of revenue from that lead. just exactly one-to-one. We just take our EMS attentive, we match it up against Shopify. We see the email when it signed up. We see how much sales we got from it over time. And we're just able to plot it over time. It's been an incredibly powerful tool.
Uh, in what ways has it been powerful? So, like, what I really wanted was like, how has it materially changed your behaviors? What insight did that unlock for you that allowed you to use it to actually drive either more or more efficient spend or both?
Yeah, I think it's always taking a step back, and I think taking off our marketer hat and putting on our consumer, our day-to-day hat. We got BFCM coming up. We know, and I can guarantee for most brands, Black Friday is when you're going to see the most sales. The question I would ask is Black Friday when you think most people actually decide to purchase your brand? And we were talking about it over lunch, but we think that everyone has a little shopping list for Black Friday already in their notes app. They already have a good idea of what brand they're going to buy. They just haven't bought it yet. So what that thesis means is that during Black Friday, CPMs are going to be at all high, but you're not actually going to be capturing a lot of interest, or you're not going to be generating a lot of interest because you already have the interest. In contrast, I would say, let's say early November, late October, this is probably the time where most people are actually deciding what they're going to buy. You're starting to get on their, like we said, their notes app. The hard part is I think all marketers kind of understand this right now, and we will talk about it, but how are you actually able to identify that or quantify it or understand how much am I willing to spend in late October, early November in order to reap the benefits in late November? And just the way we see it is we thought that leads, so being able to collect these emails is the most reliable way. The key part is you also have to understand the value of the email, and you have to understand that even though what we found is the value of email is fairly predictable, the timing of the value is very different. Where, for example, if I am advertising the week before Black Friday, that email is probably going to have a huge spike in the next 7 days. If I'm advertising right now, it's going to take probably a month to get the full value of that email. And it's just being able to understand that nuance and being willing to spend essentially when very few people are really spending, and then being willing to pull back when everyone starts spending, you start getting these inflated CPMs. It just allows you to get a little bit of an edge in terms of better understanding the actual interest of your demand.
Okay. I still have a million more questions. That's a great answer. So again, practically then, did that materially increase your spend leading up to Black Friday? Like, because what I've told people before, actually, I've written and published some stuff about this in some sort of external publications, but I had noticed a long time ago, but back when I was a Common Thread Collective, noticed a long time ago that what we call the delayed attribution multiplier, the idea of like the way that value gets created from day 1 to day 28 on Meta, as the case may be, right? The gap between those two numbers goes up a bunch in November relative to other times of year. And it's basically just the same thing. All you're saying is that, like, if you just measure on 1 day click on your Meta spend, and really on any marketing channel spend on November 10th, okay, then that number is going to get multiplied by a larger number during November than it would be like on a 28-day timeline in August, right? So it's basically the idea is that on November 10th, somebody again writes their note in their notes app or whatever, and they maybe don't buy today, but they do buy on Black Friday. And that specific seasonal moment is unique to Black Friday. And so what that means is you should spend more on November 10th than what your metrics look like in platform. That's basically what it means, is that your spend should increase because the value of that spend is going to be higher than it looks like on day 1. That's the brass tacks. So is that sort of the main way that this has been helpful to you guys, has been as a way of sort of more precisely, because what I just said is a little bit vibes based. There's you could do some math on it, but it's not super precise. But with an actual cost per email, you've actually got a way to sort of pin a leading metric here. A leading indicator is what I mean. You got a way to pin a leading indicator to that spend. So is that what it actually got you guys to do? Is spend more at particular moments and spend less at other moments, or spend more overall, or like how did it actually play out for you?
Yeah, I think a great real example is tariffs in Q2. I think we all dealt with it. We all saw how volatile the market was. And what we saw is that even though the buying intent wasn't there was probably a lot of uncertainty in the demand for the American consumer. we saw that we saw the cost drop so low in our marketing platforms that we identified, hey, even though we're not seeing the sales to justify this spend level today, we believe that over time, these leads will mature to be valuable, and we're getting them for the cheapest price we'll get them all year. So we were able to surge into that and really build up for, like, say, let's say our Memorial Day and Father's Day are our key moments. And we just went in there with such a large funnel. We love talking about a funnel. And we went in there with such a large funnel that when you have that kind of resilient baseline of demand that you just haven't realized, it makes execution so much easier. It allows you to take these big swings and not be worried about the downside. And I think that just keeps multiplying. So I think that's one concrete example is tariff volatility. Just being able to identify costs are low, even though people aren't necessarily converting, we're able to have like you said, a more precise way of measuring that demand.
Well, let me ask this. So do you guys find that an email captured at different times of year relative to seasonal peaks differently valuable? Because actually part of the thing that's sort of inherent in the thing that you're saying is like, there's a lot of talk about in the sort of e-commerce advertising world about sort of like how to how to generate creative that wins, sort of all the time, creating better funnels, better offers, better whatever it is. But what people are missing in that conversation a lot of times is something that you're actually saying is central to the consumer's relationship to your business, which is moments, seasonal moments, which is a relationship between both promotion probably as well as, and I'm not sure exactly your promotion strategy, but promotion as well as just like the reality of the surge in demand that happens at these different moments, like you mentioned, Father's Day, BFCM, Memorial Day, etc. So what you're doing, as far as I can tell, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, is you're centering moments in your marketing strategy. You're saying like, this is like, we are going to behave as if the value capture is going to be disproportionate at those moments. And our job is to make those moments as big as possible. And therefore, because that's where all the demand is. So that's where we have to squeeze the sponge or, like I said, empty the funnel or however you want to say it. Yeah. So first of all, did I explain that right? Because I think a lot of people actually undervalue moments, particularly in a business. I mean, in a business like yours, they hopefully value it properly. But if you're like a supplement person, you're probably thinking less about moments. But secondly, do you find that the value of an email changes relative to the timeline to the moment? So let's just take Black Friday. If you capture the email on September 1, does it have a different value than November 1?
Yeah.
At Black Friday.
Yeah. So speaking about two parts of the question, on the moments one and how we execute against that, we definitely are very seasonal because we're very gifting heavy. We're a great gift for women to buy to men. And we also have a large selection for men to buy to women. So that is definitely a core part of our business. And it's always the same question of so a great example is our Christmas cutoff. Let's say it's going to be late December 20th, December 21st. Is that the moment where the spend has the most impact, or is that just the moment where, I love the phrase squeezing the sponge. I think that's a great way to say it. Are we just squeezing the sponge of pre-built demand? And I think we both seem to agree that it seems like we're probably squeezing their sponge. There's nothing special about, December 20th, December 21st. And then it becomes a question of knowing I'm not creating demand that day and I'm just capturing, when can I actually spend? And that's constantly the issue we have. A great advice I have for a lot of brands, and actually probably borrowed it from a different brand, is just ask customers, when did they first hear about you? See how it tracks over time. And if you're a larger AOB brand like us, you might see a shockingly small percentage of customers hearing about you within, the past month, past week, and a shockingly large heard about you for years. I love the example of like, I always try to understand my own shopping behavior because I think a lot of the best ideas I've had have been from that. Hexclad, super well-known e-commerce brand, the pants cookware. Purchase experience for that was, I heard about it for probably 2 years ago. Then I saw it all over social media, could not get away from it. It seemed like every influencer was using it. And then I happened to get a gift card from Amazon, and that's the moment where I decided to buy. And then I know that, thinking about, I came from this analytics background. They have an analyst somewhere who's looking at me and just being like, oh, our spend probably had more impact today because Michael decided to purchase. But in reality, it's a complex story underlying the actual data, and it gets averaged out. But I think that you can't lose sight of that story, and you have to be able to action against that story, knowing that hey, I might be spending $1 today, but I might be realizing the benefit over the next 3 months, over the next year, maybe even 2 years, depending on, your brand shopping behavior. So that was my whole spiel about moments. Our biggest moment isn't necessarily your most impactful spend time. And then it just turns into when is spend impactful. The other point you brought up was about, the value per lead. I think that's the tricky part to execute. And we talked about it, how this was something you would only recommend to brands that have it very dialed in. So what cost per lead does is it lets you better attribute spend to impact, but it makes it harder to attribute impact to dollar. So I love viewing it as a spectrum where you have CAC on this side. I know exactly how much dollar my impact has. It's my AOV, but it's hard to attribute spend. On this side, I have CPM where the impact is impression. I know exactly how many impressions I got and how much it costed to get them. But it's hard to attribute impact. If you talk to me about like how much is each impression actually worth in dollars, almost clueless. So you have this spectrum. And then from this side to this side, you essentially have you have a CAC, you have add to cart, so cost per add to cart, cost per email, cost per click, and then maybe some other like cost per view or cost per hook. So what we found is this cost per email isn't perfect, but it lets you better attribute the marketing, and it adds a complexity to attribute to that impact, which is kind of what we discussed. So what you will see is that there will be seasonality to your impact. For us, a great example is immediately before big moments is when our value just skyrockets. This is probably when everyone is actually deciding what to purchase. On our actual big moments, the value can be very high, but you don't see that nice lifetime value curve. You essentially realize that value on the same day, or you don't realize it for a very long time. I think intuitively it makes sense. If I'm shopping for a Christmas gift and then Christmas passes, I'm probably not shopping for that Christmas gift for another year. So it's really about trying to decide where you want the complexity. Do you want the complexity to be how impactful is my marketing spend? Or do you want the complexity to be how much dollar do I make for a certain metric? We tried things like cost per add to cart, cost per click, these different ways, even cost per impression. Kind of glanced at that one and decided not to make it a guiding metric just because it's pretty nasty to dilute it. And just the value of this email capture is that you're able to track that email in Shopify. So I can see exactly how much dollars I got on that email and exactly when I got it. Where I click with all this privacy stuff, I think there are a lot of improvements with ability to have better resolution. Don't think it's amazing yet though. So it's really what we landed on as like the best way to balance that attribution of cost and dollars. Yeah.
If you are liking this conversation, you can thank my friends at INTELLIGEMS for introducing me to Michael. This is an obvious fit because INTELLIGEMS is all about empowering smart, data-driven, operationally excellent e-commerce thinkers, operators to make data-driven decisions about the things that really move the needle in their businesses. And they do that by allowing you to test well beyond the basics. So much bigger tests than just simple split tests of headlines and button colors and all that kind of stuff. Those things can be useful. Certainly headline testing as a path to messaging testing can be really, really valuable, but there's so much more you can do, and you can do it with INTELLIGEMS very quickly and easily. INTELLIGEMS is very easy to install. You don't even need a developer. And right away, you can get testing things like offer price. You can get, or your product price. You can get test things like introductory offers, the 10% off you offer to customers, etc. Your free shipping threshold, your free shipping charge. You can actually run full like Shopify theme split tests. So if you're launching a new website, you can test it before it goes live in INTELLIGEMS to see if you're about to break your conversion rate by having a new website. Just anything you can think of, they allow you to do that. They've actually even recently introduced the ability to edit and test checkout, which is amazing because that's very close to purchase and a huge value add as well. If you're serious about testing the things that really move the needle in your business, responding in a data-driven way in your business, use a tool that literally every one of my clients uses, that is INTELLIGEMS. By going to intelligems.io, use the code FARIS20, FARIS20, to get 20% off your first 3 months and get testing and optimizing today. I'm curious if there's any insights specifically that you can share that this tracking yielded for you that were surprising. Like at some point, did you did you guys, by doing this, discover something that was like, whoa, that's different than we thought?
I think it's always about these pockets where there are weird. I think it's less so a broad insight, but it's more so where we had these random moments. And I'm guessing it's a macro factor of everyone else pulling back spend, where it's like, why is marketing cost so cheap? And sure, spend might get uncomfortable as a percentage of our total sales, but we just feel confident that we're generating so much future value that those moments, I would say, even though we surge into, and even though we have a lot of this data in back, we still look back every time and say, oh, I just wish we could put in another 10%, another 20%. I think that, like, in terms of like how to actually execute this, since it sounds like we're getting very tactical, the number one thing I can say is you have to understand your dilution. And we talk about it a lot. I love the quote that statisticians sleep with one head in the oven and one head in their feet in the freezer so that the average temperature is comfortable. And it's kind of the same where, you can look at, for example, your value per lead, but it's about what is that incremental lead. And I think where you can go wrong is if you assume your incremental leads value is equal to your total. Just speaking to how we look at it, for example, I can graph the number of leads on a scatter plot by day, and I can graph how much dollar each one generated. And I can see whether there's any kind of correlation between the number of leads and the average amount of dollar generated per lead. And then I can the great part is you can just visually see these things where I'm able to visually see at what point there looks like a break point. For us, it's a lot of times like when we're starting to get, hundreds of millions of impressions per week, suddenly it's like, oh, the US only has 350 million people. Probably if I'm getting 700 million impressions, we're getting a little bit into the repetitive diminishing returns field.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think that what's interesting is it looks fairly clear when you see these breakpoints of like, oh, I hit this number of leads per day. I hit this cost per lead. I hit this amount of spend per day. And you just start seeing like, oh, wow, that dropped off very quickly. Even though I'm getting, leads, it's obviously the quality is being diluted. I think the other one that has been really important, and that's uncomfortable. And I think it might turn into a whole different discussion about like how you make tactical decisions, but you have to be willing to make predictions as a decision maker, and you have to be willing to look back and say, was that correct or was that wrong? And that's something we push in the organization a lot, is like, you're expected to be wrong 20 to 30% of the time. You have the permission and the expectation to be wrong, but you have to understand when you're wrong, why you're wrong, and just so you can learn from it. Um, I'm about to go on a super random tangent, but one of my favorite stories. Have you heard of Japanese chicken genderers?
No.
So what happens is it's really important, and you'll see how it connects. It's really important to be able to tell whether a baby chicken is male or female. The problem is it's for some reason next to impossible. So in Japan, they have essentially these trained chicken genderers that just by trial and error, like a feedback loop, can do it accurate about 98% of the time. The really crazy part, though, is that even in 2024, with all of the AI, with all of the crazy computer vision, computers can only do it 81% of the time, 82%. Sometimes maybe they can do 90%, I'm hearing. But still, these people, just by pure trial and error, are able to do it more accurately. And the thing is, they aren't able to actually describe why, like, they're putting in one pile or why the other. It's just because they just pattern recognition in like the back of their head, they're able to do these things. And I kind of view connected to
That's
some
amazing.
timers.
Yeah.
I think a lot of it is just like building that kind of feedback loop for yourself as a performance marketer, as a decision maker, so that you can start trusting your instinct just because you refined it in a pretty quantitative, rigorous way over time. I think that's really important. So like when it comes to these cost per leads, we say, hey, this is the cost per lead we're targeting. This is the impact we expect, and we just check it on a weekly basis.
Hmm. Yeah. So you're saying the prediction, the value of the prediction exercise for you guys is a way to test and learn and get feedback about, sort of forces you into a pattern of getting that feedback, both negative and positive, so that you can then kind of figure out how to think better about the total market, about marketing mix, among other things in the business?
I think what it's taught us is we understand how our model breaks. So we've learned, for example, that the model is always a simplification of the real world. Kind of mentioned it with like my purchase journey with HexClass.
Yes.
But
Yes.
the assumption that your spend today will generate a lead today, and if it doesn't, it does nothing and will have no impact on tomorrow, is not correct. So I think that's the trap we've fallen in, is that you just start relying so much on a model, so much on one way of thinking, that you lose sight of the flaws. So what this feedback loop has forced us to do is recognize more of the complexity, that like, hey, my cost per lead today, how much it cost me to get someone to sign up for email, is still dependent on yesterday. And you know what the crazy part is that, so we always talk about like incremental ROAS as a business, like how much impact will my dollar today have? It's like the idea of, this is getting pretty out there, but a
No, it's
non-Markovian
good.
chain. So LLMs, ChatGPT, they built on Markovian chains, which are that like you can show me some historical data and I could tell you exactly what the next line of text will be. If you think about it, spend is not like that, because my ROAS today on a 30-day basis probably depends a lot on how much I spend tomorrow or next week. So then in order to answer how much ROI am I going to get on dollars spent today, you also have to tell me how much am I going to spend tomorrow and how much did I spend yesterday. And it just turns into this really, really complex dynamic. And I think, of course, the only way we as humans can navigate these dynamics are like these simplifications of a model, like a CAC, a cost per lead basis. So we choose cost per lead because we think that that's a more accurate simplification, but it still breaks.
Yeah.
That's a tough
Yeah.
truth, is that it breaks and you have to figure out the patterns of what causes it to break, so that next time you're in those shoes, you're able to understand like, hey, even though cost per lead is really low right now, we understand that maybe with the promotion ending pretty soon, we're not going to realize a lot of value in 2 weeks. Something of that level of complexity. So pretty out there.
Yeah. No, it's good. I don't think it's out there at all. I think actually it highlights something that we talked about, or that you mentioned it a little bit ago, which is that like this, and this, I think why you are an interesting guest on this show, is that there's this assessment I think almost every operator needs to make, which is like, how good am I really? And therefore, what, and really not how good, but like, what am I great at? And therefore, what ought I build my operational processes around versus not? And I actually think this is a sneaky difficult part and sneaky important part of a lot of brands. Like, there are some brands that should disregard everything you are saying right now in this episode, because they do not have the analytical chops to do it. And they don't have the data gathering, and it will be a huge organizational lift. And instead, what they ought to do is redirect that time towards actioning as many possible swings of the bat as they can, or whatever, because they're really good at that. They're really good at building, or they ought to reduce their growth goals, because they just need to get realistic about the fact that like the faster and harder you push it, the more technical you have to get, and the harder cash flow gets, and the more you're making the game difficult, and or whatever. Or they need to contract somebody who can help them sort through some data questions, because they recognize this is what it would look like, and they need to add a team member or whatever it is. But I think the way you're thinking about this reflects this combination of intelligence about tactics and strategy, and about model building and analytics, with what I hear is some operationalization of those strategies, right? So the idea of like, you expect people to make predictions and then to be wrong at certain amounts of time, means that internally in your organization there's some operational process where somebody knows they have to do this thing, where they make a prediction, they run a test, they do whatever, and that means your ideas about prediction and feedback loops become operational realities, etc. And that I think is the sort of very, very difficult thing about a lot of these things, is that like, it's hard to figure out how and where to put your focus for your brand. But what I'll say is, in the midst of all of that, for a brand like yours that has this very core problem of the awareness and demand are often disconnected to each other, right? Because of different moments. Like, this is a really smart way to go about it. And I think a lot of brands listening to or watching this probably ought to dig into this problem a little bit, because those moments come and go. I mean, I certainly have at least one extremely seasonal brand that is a client of mine. And I've wondered for a while, like, how should we handle this? And my thought is like, okay, what is this organization's capacity to do something like this model as a way of solving this problem? Because I really do wonder every year if we are underspending in October, because our AMER is too high in October and our spend is low. And I know the CPM is going to go up in 3 weeks, and a lot of those people could actually buy. And maybe we really, so it represents a real tangible way forward, but it's also hard. It requires some efforts. And so sort of figuring out how to solve this at the organizational level isn't just a matter of papering the math. It's a matter of figuring out, okay, how do I build this into my organization, and then find ways to sort of reinforce it and make sure it gets operationalized, because it's really, really hard. It is time to get better customer service software that also costs you less, and that is by upgrading your customer service help desk to RICHPANEL. The key thing with RICHPANEL is that it is built from the ground up with AI, powered by AI. And if there's a place in your business where it's just very obvious that AI can make a big difference really fast, it is the customer service help desk, where AI can help your agents do a lot more faster and therefore create a better experience for your customers. And critically, your agents or RICHPANEL at the same time has a customer service self-help portal powered by AI to help customers get answers to their questions really, really fast. And you put that all together, and what happens is that on average, when people install RICHPANEL, especially coming over from Gorgias or Zendesk, they see a 30% ticket volume reduction in tickets, because customers are getting answers to their questions faster through the self-help portal without having to go through long forums or Q&A sections or FAQs or whatever it is, and help centers, that kind of thing. And at the same time, and here's the amazing thing, RICHPANEL guarantees that they will save you at least 30% on your bill from switching to Gorgias or Zendesk. So you're going to have a better experience for your customer. It's going to cost you less money, and it's even easy to install. They know you don't have time to waste installing and training your team on how to use RICHPANEL, so they promise to get it done with you in 2 weeks so that you can be up and running and going. Really awesome. Multiple of my clients are using RICHPANEL. Multiple very, very large brands are using RICHPANEL. It's not just cheap and for small teams or something like that. It is affordable, but it can be scaled with very large teams. It even has an AI-powered agent that can go and interact on your social comments, on your ads, on behalf of your brand. It does an incredible job doing that. It doesn't just hallucinate all the time or anything. It'll do a really great job. It's one of those things that's extremely annoying about running Facebook and Instagram ads. You should be interacting in the comments, but it's really hard to do, really hard to stay on top of. Let their AI agent do it for you. Go to richpanel.com, get set up today. You can follow the link in the show notes for that, richpanel.com. To try it out today.
Honestly, I love the direction we're going down, because if we start getting to like, how do you build great decision making into your decision makers or into your organization? How do you embed that? And I think that where I started from, and just kind of what I've learned from my own experience, is every bad decision I've made or that I've seen an organization make, just really 2 issues. It's number 1, greed, or number 2, fear. And somewhere you're on that spectrum. The hard part is understanding and having the self-awareness to say, am I being greedy right now, or am I being fearful? Am I leaving things on the table because I'm afraid to roll the dice? Or am I starting to get a little bit delusional about what the potential is, and because of that, I'm trying to chase everything when I just need to chase something? And I think that's really what it comes down to, is all of these like operational, like be wrong 20% of the time, track the percentage of times you're right, track how often you're right in the correct direction, but wrong magnitude. It just comes down to building that level of self-awareness, because the thing is that as soon as you have that ability to understand, am I being fearful or greedy? If I know I'm being a little bit afraid, I'll force myself to be a little more uncomfortably aggressive. But if I see myself getting slightly overexcited, it just turns into having the emotional control to be like, okay, we need to reel this back, because I recognize when I was in this position 2 months ago, I bet it all and maybe I lost it all. So I think the other one you brought up was just how a brand should look at like their spend on a macro level, on a year-over-year level. I think the number one, and I can tell you about how we kind of viewed it in order to kind of justify some more risky, more aggressive moves. It's about asking yourself the question. I love thought experiments, and the thought experiment is, let's say hypothetically this brand, it's been able to, scale up pretty well, 20%, 30%, 40%, somewhere in that magnitude of year-over-year increases in spend. Asking, why was I able to spend more this year and see the financial impact that I did versus last year? And the second one is, next year, do I think I'm going to spend more or less than I am this year? I spent 30% more this year, and I'll probably spend 30% more next year. And then it just comes down to like, why can't I do 30% more this year instead of just waiting for next year? And there are good answers. And the three answers that we've seen internally, number one is it's macro, where you're able to spend more because your Stanley Cup and a car burned with your cup inside of it, and you can grow to $1 billion. So that's number one, something out of your control. Number two is you manage to improve efficiency somehow, whether it's reach a new audience in an incremental way through a new category, or you just got better at creative, you got better at media mix. Number three, which I think 80/20 is the impact, is just time for a brand like us, where we still just naturally too closely tie spend to sales. When in reality, it's not just 1 month, it's not just 3 months, it's probably years. And just we're forced because of like just the corporate culture in America, drive for results, that like we can't think on a 10-year time frame. It is like an annual, probably at most for most brands. And knowing it's time, it turns into a question of less so can I spend more or what's optimal, but what's within my risk tolerance. Because the fire you play with when you start scaling up spend quickly is that it's a cone of uncertainty. Maybe my expected value, maybe my average is higher as I spend more, but the risk of a very catastrophic outcome is also higher. The risk of a phenomenal outcome is also higher. And just asking yourself, it kind of shifted the question in our organization away from, am I being optimal? Because the answer was, no, we're not being optimal. We should probably spend more because we're going to spend more next year at worse CPMs. The question became, how much can we spend to fit within our risk tolerance? And that's a very, very different way to view the business. And it just changed how we make decisions, because then you can attach numbers of like, hey, we can't crash the business. We don't want to have a cash flow issue. We don't want to crunch the business. So that's outside of our risk tolerance. How much can we spend while, setting ourselves up for this upside while minimizing that downside risk? It's been a pretty interesting thing. And I think it's something that every brand needs to spend time on, is if I've been able to scale up the business, exactly, just chart it out. What has enabled you to? And if you see a giant blank bucket of like, hey, we had a lot of A/B tests, maybe drove 10%, but we grew 40%. That other 30% is probably just this time element that I think we all underestimate.
Okay, I agree so much with what you were saying here, Michael. There is a risk tolerance thing. I have been actually, one of my big things recently is the idea that reasonable expectations is like a massive advantage in e-commerce. I've put out some content about it. I've done some interviews about it recently. But there's just these people building really, 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 really good businesses that are not that big yet, relatively speaking. And it's because it takes a really long time for most people to build a really big business. Like there's aren't actually very many people who can build a huge business very fast. The guy with the single biggest business in e-commerce that I have talked to lately is Sunil Agrawal, who runs a holdco publicly traded in India called VGL Group. It's got $400 million business. There are 6 brands in it. His biggest brand is $240 million a year. A monster business. He started it in 1980. And so my conversation with him is really, really good because it sort of highlights like, what does it take to do that over insane lengths of time? Well, what you end up with, though, is like a really, really good business and without sort of ridiculous expectations about what to do next. And so yeah, your assessment of risk tolerance, and then also sort of trying to factor in why are you actually growing the ways that you are, and what is actually causing your success versus not. Macroeconomic. I think actually product development is really underrated in this. Just that like you release a product that creates step changes in your value creation, all kinds of things like that I think are harder to see, and when people sort of just want to find the meta tactic that takes them to the next level and figure out how they can unlock the funnel, and I just don't think that's quite right. So, yeah.
actually listened to that one just because you mentioned in
Oh,
some jewelry space, and I was like, I need to hear this. And my first thought, and I think it's interesting for us as like mainly digital marketers, if I look at the top 10 brands right now, like Nike, Lululemon, all of them got to being top 10 before digital marketing existed. And that sometimes it feels like we got gifted all of this information. We got CPM, CPC, we get daily creative analytics. We can have every metric we can think of. And it feels like that has actually made us like paralyzed by the amount of information, and that these OG brands who just view it as like marketing, as spend on marketing, and be ready to view it as like a risk benefit, view it as an investment versus a short term like day trading vibe, which I feel like directionally a lot of DTC has gone to. I feel
yep.
like there's something there where there's not really a 10 billion company built on the back of Facebook, but all of our companies are built on the back of essentially Facebook. And it's like, well, all these companies were able to get to 10, $50 billion without digital marketing. And then how come we obsess so much about it? And I think there's good reason. It's definitely the most powerful growth lever at this point. Instagram advertising, it's phenomenal. The data allows us to iterate at a speed that no one else can iterate. But then in the back of our head, I think that sometimes we just need to remember that the biggest brands in the world were built on pretty basic budgeting, pretty basic marketing, pretty basic attribution. And that all of this information we're given, sometimes we need to ask ourselves, is it really enabling us to make better decisions all the time? Is it allowing us to make better decisions in some ways and not others? It was really interesting because they just do TV, right? And if you ask me, could
Yeah.
I make a what 9-figure jewelry brand based on TV? Like, there's no way.
Yeah. Well, it's funny though, because what Sunil will tell you at the same time, and I asked him, like, what do you want me to promote in this episode? And he said, I'm always looking for good digital marketers. So I think on the one hand, you're right. He recognizes that, TV was a unique opportunity. I think they have their own channel or something, that it's an important opportunity. On the other hand, I think he also recognizes that tide is changing, and that he will have to adjust that. And that's why at the same time as he's running a $240 million brand, he literally started a brand new brand from scratch on Shopify, like $0 on start, they're not just acquiring or whatever, and I think and he said, like, send me digital marketing talent. That's the thing I want. So I think there is a real mixed thing here where it's like, I think you're right that there's something about, I think the thing that you're hitting that I think is right is that, that Meta for people can suck them into the day trading mentality because it feels like day trading, and probably just like actual day trading. I bet there are people who can like make money doing it, and make like a lot of money doing it, But the thing that everybody understands about day trading, I hope, is that group of people is extremely small, and that like the best bet statistically is not that you should try to be on that extreme end of the bell curve of outcomes, but that you ought to instead look towards the middle of the curve and say, like, well, what is the actual best way to do this? And it's not day trading. It's not a day trading mentality. But Meta, I think, sucks people into that mentality a little bit and can become very quickly a get rich quick scheme, and this comes back to your comment about the mistakes you've made have come back to greed or fear. Like, this is the greed component of that. And I've watched this happen so many times. People just want that, when actually, like, the core problems in their business are not going to be solved with one little tactic here and there. It'll be solved with actually, like, your cost per lead example is a great example of aligning the tactic to the customer in this really significant way, which is like, you understand what's happening for your consumer, and therefore cost per lead as a way to track what's happening makes perfect sense, because that they're going to be motivated to buy differently at different moments, that their awareness and their demand are going to be in different spheres, but you need some way to track that because the attribution's a mess, and on top of that there's privacy issues. And so you sort of start with that lens of who the customer is, what they like, what they care about, and then how you do your promotional strategy relative to those moments, and how you do your tactics relative to those moments, and you think about doing that repeatedly over a very long period of time, and that actually creates this. And I just love the way you're talking, because and I'll just tell you, like, your mental horsepower is just way higher than the vast majority of people that I have talked to in our space, including myself. Okay, so, like, just no question. And you had your analytical chops as well. You've got real background in these kinds of things. And yet your mentality is not like, okay, I'm going to go use that to go like build the craziest, fastest, biggest thing really fast. It's like, you should take that and apply it to reasonable expectations over a long timeline, and then you'll get really, really rich if you do that. By the way, but yeah, that's. I mean, I don't know. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but that's the way I would sort of repackage part of what you just said.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is just we talked about it, but I just love reading.
Yeah,
You look at my grades. I was a pretty decent student, but not breathtaking. But I think that a lot of it is just from reading the biographies of these really impressive business people. And, like I think a great example is just Warren Buffett. The man barely knows how to use a computer, yet somehow he's just destroying the stock market in terms of performance over what, 50 years or so. And it comes down to he put together that if you get the tiny details wrong of like, oh, transaction value, well, like, do I buy it today or tomorrow? Like, you can get those tiny details wrong, but if you set yourself up for the big picture, you can win pretty consistently. And it just takes time. And that the trap you
yeah,
can fall into is just trying to rush it. It's super interesting just seeing how many different ways there are to succeed. Where we talked about it, but like Ridge, they crushed that. There seems to be some kind of process power there in terms of ability to execute on digital marketing and like these category launches. Like there's some kind of magic there. And then you have these probably more like strategic great players like we were talking Runes is a great one probably, where they've made it seems like consistently strong big picture decisions, whether it's like the head count, whether it's like their channel strategy, like product development, brand strategy. They nail those big pictures, and then just trying to figure out for your brand where your skill set lies. If you win, and whatever winning looks like, you become number one in the category, you become $1 billion company, whatever it looks like. What is the path you get there? Is it by these hyper tactical decisions, or is it by just getting two or three major decisions right? I think Ruggable is another great example where they just got the product right. They got the product right, they got the design right, they got the value proposition right, and then everything falls into line where they're great at that one thing and good at everything else. It's impossible to be great at everything, but then like for your organization and maybe even on an agency level, it's like I know you were talking to Taylor about like what are you great at, what am I great at. It's about within the brand having the self-awareness to be like, what are we actually great at, what are we not so good at, are we so bad at what we're not so good at that we need to up
yeah,
level it, or do we
yeah,
push further on what we're great at? So
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
That's good. All right, we only got a few minutes left. I actually want to ask a few more very, very technical questions about the cost per lead thing really fast, just because I didn't want to miss them while we have the conversation. So, although I actually loved this conversation, went from hyper tactical to big picture thinking. I think the best thinkers are in the space have a really good ability to do both. So, okay, so let's talk about a couple things in a technical sense. In terms of your optimization of your ad spend, you are not optimizing for cost per lead, right? You're optimizing for conversions, then tracking cost per lead. Am I correct about that?
Yeah, that's correct. So cost per lead is a leading indicator for what we expect to be contribution margin is our end goal. So we
Yeah.
tune our cost per lead goals to optimize for long-term contribution margin growth, let's say over 30, 60, 90 days.
But you're running your ad spend as like standard. Let's just take your meta spend, for example. You're optimizing for conversions, highest volume, highest value, manual bid, whatever you do. I don't know, but like something like that. And then just at the tracking of that spend, you're tracking the cost per lead. So because it's an important clarification, I'm not telling everybody to go optimize for leads on Meta. You will get garbage leads if you do that, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, yeah. I've actually been bugging our team to maybe try it out once or twice,
Yeah.
but I
Yeah,
definitely
yeah.
don't feel correct
I
that.
would too if I was you. I would allocate some amount of spend, and my hypothesis would be that it would perform really poorly. I would put a giant um like haircut on what the actual value of that lead is, but like I would reduce it by like at least 90%, honestly. But look, if you get the lead for 8% of the cost of the other one, and the value is 90% less, you win. So if you get the cost, if you get the and anything's worth paying for if it's cheap enough. So yeah, even if it's a really bad quality lead. So yeah, okay. But right now you're optimizing for conversions. You're going to try optimizing for CPL, but yeah, okay, great. Does your value per lead change relative to the offer with which you capture the lead? For example, if you're doing a standard 10% off, for new customers versus 20% off for new customers or something like that? Does the value per lead change?
I love that question because I think that I could go on another rabbit hole of CRO testing.
Yeah.
LTV over CAC, view it that way, where if I do 20% off, my CAC is going to go down, my LTV is going to go down because of the discount. Which one goes down faster matters whether or not it's a good idea. It's not worth it to guess. I think that every brand, based on your unit economics, you have a different situation. But I think it is one of the most important things to test.
Yeah. Yeah. And well, part of the wondering is if you guys are actually testing the value difference in a really clear way, because, the thing everybody worries about with almost any leading indicator is something you sort of noted earlier, which is degradation of value based off of any number of factors, and so I'm curious sort of how you guys think about different tests like that and different cohort value creations based off of like offer price or whatever it is.
Yeah, I think that when it comes to offer price, it's just about measure the dilution, see what the AOV, see what happens in different silos to the AOV, to the sign up rate, to the number of conversions. And you'll see some kind of interplay with them, and then run a statistical test on each one separately, the key part is separately, and then see which ones are noise versus truly happening. It's pretty surprising where, for example, I think some brands are going to find, not the majority, but some will find that as they increase their discounts, their AOV might actually go up because suddenly people are unlocking a higher purchase.
Right.
On the other hand, some might see the opposite where they increase the discount and conversion rate goes down because there's some level of perceived value. People think that it's over discounted. So it is very personal to every brand, but it is one of the most important levers to pull. I would say definitely testing your offers, your sign up offers, both on the site and also through like email.
Last question about this. Are you doing anything to sort of, or just given your focus on cost per lead, are you doing a bunch of stuff to increase the value per lead at the tactical level? What I'm really thinking of here is like changing your, split testing your flows and things like that, so that once somebody actually signs up with their email address, are you guys doing a lot of sort of post sign up testing of tactics?
We're actually hiring a retention person right now, so that is the goal. I would say the other part that sometimes gets misconstrued is that cost per lead is the indicator, where the goal isn't to get leads. The thought process is that if you're getting leads, you have high quality traffic.
Right.
So it's more of like a canary in the coal mine that's correlated to strong performance, but isn't necessarily your performance driver. I think it goes into what you mentioned, the like optimizing for cost per lead, where suddenly if I rig the canary, then it becomes useless. It's only useful if you give it if you view it as an indicator and not actually as the metric or the driver.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because that's clear to me from talking to you about it, that you're not actually saying that it's the driver. You're just saying it's a really reliable indicator. It's what you started the conversation by saying. Is you said the reason we like this is because you can tie the lead to the exact moment of the lead capture with the email address, and then to the exact moment of purchase with the email address. And because those two things line up so perfectly, it just becomes a reliable data set. That's the reason it's so useful. But I would kind of wonder if for that same reason, even though it's not the driver of value, for that same reason, it becomes useful uniquely in like post capture testing, because you're just testing something that you have such reliable data for. So that, it's not that like it's not that it's particularly about the way the email address drives value, but just again, because you're tying the test to the email address and you already have all this measurement set up against that, it might yield, this is my theory anyway, it might yield interesting test outcomes or something like that. I don't know. That was the thought.
Oh, I definitely agree. I think that you can view the Jaxxon organization as just two distinct functions. One is optimizing cost per lead. So this is like our creative optimization, our performance marketing, our media buying. They're trying to get cost per lead without just rigging the deck and doing something weird with like your campaign optimization. And the other side of the house, let's say, is like e-commerce, pricing, product, all these kind of things are about optimizing the value per lead. Like every part of your organization can play into it, where your CX team might be increasing your repurchase rate, which would increase your value per lead. It just simplifies an otherwise 20 directions into 2 directions. Does this project increase cost or improve cost per lead, improve value per lead? Or something like a product launch is actually, you brought it up, interesting, because it kind of does both, where you have an LTV play, you have a cat
Yeah.
play.
Yeah.
New category could both reduce your cost per lead by reaching a new incremental audience, and at the same time, you're getting a higher value per lead, whether through AOV or repurchase rate, or just through, I guess AOV and repurchase rate would probably be the main two.
I'm going to ask you one last question, and you can make it as brief or not as you want. Is there anything that's just sort of top of mind, hot on your mind right now in the e-commerce space that you think is just worth sharing? It could be totally unrelated to the conversation we've had so far, but just something you've been thinking about, noodling on, noticing, something like that, that's worth sharing with an audience of e-commerce operators and media buyers and those kinds of people.
So I think what's top of mind for me, and we see a lot of brands breaking into different spaces, obviously like gummy supplements, obviously like CPG, a lot of different routes to go, and kind of talked about it. What is the competitive dynamic within D2C as it gets more crowded within these categories? Because I think that you can view business categories from a macro lens point where there's a rapid expansion, and then almost every time there's a contraction. There used to be 50 million different airlines, and now there are like 5. There used to be 50 million different phone companies. Now there are 2, Apple and Android. What does the contraction look like for D2C, whether and for categories, where it's always top of mind for me, where I'm in a new category and it feels like we went through this rapid expansion phase where a million companies got into men's jewelry. And then it feels like right now we're hitting that contraction stage. I'm super interested in some of these big rising categories, namely like supplements, CPG. What does their contraction phase look like? What does the competitive dynamic look like as more people crowd into this space? Because it just looks like a money printing machine. Like we were both talking about it, but it's like, well, I need a little bit of exposure to that side of the house, subscription-based businesses. I think it's interesting from like a macro level what will happen. And I think that like obviously these brands are looking for differentiation, they're building moats around themselves, and just how sturdy are those moats going to be against rising Facebook costs, more competition, maybe even more regulation? Like, super interesting.
I love it. Great thought. I wondered if you'd say something really tactical or if you'd say something bigger picture. Or you went bigger picture. I like it. You are trying to get more active on Twitter, you said, on X. So God. I have already linked out to you on my feed, but at Michael and Eggie, Eggie, that's your dog, is on X. Go give him a follow. I've also added you immediately to my Titans of D2C list on X. So if you're following that, you'll already get Michael's tweets. You're also on LinkedIn. Michael, thanks so much for your time. All of the links for Michael's X and LinkedIn are in the show notes. I'm sure I will have Michael back at some point if he has time. Thanks, man. Appreciate it so much.
Yeah, definitely. Super appreciate it. Definitely need to catch up again pretty soon.
Let's do it. You live close. I hope you see what I meant in the intro, that Michael is a great conversation partner. Guy really knows what he's talking about, and I love his ability so much to go back and forth between highly tactical and big picture thinking about business. Very curious mind. He told me when we were having lunch, he reads 2 to 3 hours a day, plays piano, a lot going on there. I just think it's the kind of mind that I notice stands out as somebody really, really smart. So anyway, super enjoyable conversation for me, a guy who I definitely hope to have back and who I expect, if I was doing predictions, you will hear more and more from throughout the D2C space because he's just really smart. Go follow him in the places that I told you. The links for that are in the show notes to go do those things. And I think you will get value out of his content as he continues to put time into that. And of course, you can reach out to me at podcast@ajfgrowth.com, at ajfgrowth.com for everything that I'm doing over there. If you want to think about working with us in the future, you can do that in the next year. We will be opening up more space for clients. So, yep. And then what else? You should subscribe wherever you're watching or listening. Of course, don't forget to do that right now. If you made it this far in the video and you're not subscribed, what are you doing? Subscribe. You're going to like the show. You're going to like more of the episodes we do. It's going to be good. That's it. RICHPANEL and INTELLIGEMS. Let's not forget them. Thanks so much to both of them. They're great sponsors. I really love working with both. Go check them out. Links for those are also in the show notes in the description. That's it. I'll talk to you next time. See you soon.